Hello everyone, welcome to lecture 56 of week 12. The topic of today's lecture is sociolinguistics and language teaching. So, we have already learnt about a few notions of sociolinguistics and we have gone through the basic ideas of language teaching. So, today we will try to bridge these two. So, the target for today's class is to talk about locating sociolinguistic variation in classroom. You know what is sociolinguistic variation. We already talked about several models of sociolinguistic variation already. So, and we also talked about classroom in when we talked about language teaching. So, now we will try to locate sociolinguistic variation in classroom. We will also go back to the idea of multiple variants that we have learned, and now we will talk about something called transition zone of a continuum. So, the idea of continuum is something which is familiar to you, but transition zone is something that we will discuss. Then we will learn about the deficit hypothesis proposed by Bernstein. We will talk about spatial dynamics of hybrid languages, and finally, we will discuss the use of hybrids in the classroom. So, we already talked about different linguistic aspects of a classroom, and we said that there are three major issues that we have to deal with. The first one is the structural aspects of the classroom. So, what do we mean by the structural aspect? So, the structure of language. So, when we talk about the structure of language from different components like speech sounds, morphemes, words, phrases and sentences, we can consider all these things in the children's language. And apart from the children's language use, we can also talk about the language of the textbooks in terms of the language structure and other teaching learning materials. We can consider teachers' talk as well. So, the first part talks about structural aspects of different components of a classroom. The second component is related to language acquisition. We already talked about it in detail, and we said that language acquisition, if we talk about child language acquisition, there are certain milestones in the developmental stages. So, when we talk about a classroom, we can also relate to with the developmental stages of children's language acquisition. And the third one is related to various sociolinguistic factors like the multilingual aspects of classroom. We can also talk about code mixing, which you already know now, attitude changes, whether the children's language is reflected through a negative attitude from the teacher's talk, and certain changes and dominance. So, what do we mean by dominance? In sociolinguistics, we discussed about dominance of certain languages. So, we can consider them as a part of sociolinguistic features as well. So, when we talk about a classroom, we talk about these three together. We talk about the structure, we talk about the acquisition factors and sociolinguistic factors. Without considering these three, we cannot talk about a classroom. Now, we will try to talk about sociolinguistic variation that we have already discussed before. We learnt about the variants, and we already learnt that the variants are chosen from a pool. There is a pool of variants, and the speakers select a particular variant based on the context. And we of course talked about different models of analyzing them. Now, if we ask this question, how do we determine the variance in the languages of school children? This is not an easy task. So, we have to understand from a very hybrid kind of a data. If you happen to collect data from children, then you already know that this is extremely complex. So, when we talk about variants, we can talk about a number of things, and we can also explain them sociolinguistically, of course, considering the structural aspects. So, in multilingual classrooms, there are different codes. So, different codes are coming from different varieties that the children access, and if we ask this question, how do the children negotiate with each other? I hope you remembered that we did talk about negotiation earlier, when we said that code mixing and code switching has a negotiation factor. So, if we ask how children are negotiating with each other, we can think about a number of things. So, here is a question for you. Do you think that the negotiation strategies involve code mixing? So, if your answer is yes, then you can think about more aspects of this. If a particular strategy according to you is useful, then you can note down about the strategies for yourself. And at this point I am asking another important question. You already know about linked language or lingua franca that we have discussed previously. So, how can we talk about linked language in relation to the classrooms? So, we are talking about code mixing, but let us also talk about use of linked languages. So, we are again borrowing a term that we have learned before, language continuum. So, now let me tell you that whenever we deal with a language continuum in a geographical area, we find certain transition zones. So, it of course has some socio-historical conditions. So, in the transition zones we can find that certain changes are taking place in the pattern of the variants, certain changes are taking place for the structure of the language as well. So, when multiple variants are prominent in the transition zones, we say that there are certain historical as well as socio-linguistic conditions which are very much present. And when we talk about continuum and transition zones, let me also talk about the hybrid forms. So, what are these hybrid forms? These are basically mixed forms which can be differentiated from pidgins. So, you have learnt about pidgins and creoles. In pidgins we see that there is a sudden change where a new form is created, which is basically a kind of trade language, but hybrid forms are created when several communities coexist together for years and gradually they develop the hybrid forms. It is not sudden. So, this is the difference. So, when we think about the hybrid forms, we can find that there are different names of these hybrid forms, and popular perceptions often consider them as different languages. At times you can see that these are basically different names for the same kind of hybrid forms. If you are familiar with Ethnologue, I already asked you to go through Ethnologue website for clarification of something previously. So, you can see that Ethnologue always mentions alternative names for each and every language. So, this is the reason one language can have different names and hybrid languages can also have different names. So, the naming strategies are different. If you plan to figure out the strategies, the naming strategies of the hybrids, you can figure out that there are certain gatekeepers of language making. So, if we consider the linguistic features of hybrid language, you can talk about different features. You can talk about say phonological features, morphological features and syntactic features. So, the question is whether the hybrid language is taking the structure or the skeleton from a particular language and the lexicon from another language. So, there is a debate regarding this question. It said that you cannot actually mark that structure is particularly taken from one language and lexicon is taken from another language, rather it is quite complex. You can say that some forms compete with each other. If you remember the multiple grammar hypothesis, we did talk about the model where there is something called constant rate hypothesis. There are variants which compete with each other and whichever will win will stay in the language and otherwise language change will take place. So, I will talk about the language called Rajbongshi that I have already mentioned to you before. So, it is spoken in northern part of Bengal as I have told you, and also Assam, Meghalaya, Bihar, Nepal and Bangladesh. So, I primarily work on this language. So, I thought I will share my experience of analysis with you. So, it is actually a hybrid language. You can say that it is hybrid in nature. Of course, you can say that there are debates regarding whether it is a dialect or a language. So, I am not going to the debate. So, we are no one to comment on the standardization process, but it is hybrid in nature, which have different components in different parts of a continuum. So, you know what a continuum is, and I already told you about the idea of transition as well. So, Rajbongshi is considered as a major lingua franca or link language for multiple communities in the northern part of Bengal, where I primarily work. So, it is known by most of the minority groups, and smaller groups tend to shift to Rajbongshi. For example, Rabha, which is a Tibeto-Burman language, which is spoken widely in Assam, Meghalaya, and also in West Bengal. So, Rabha speakers are shifting to Rajbongshi now, which is of course a minority group in West Bengal. And if we consider the Rajbongshi population in Nepal, while 2008 gave a detailed account of Rajbongshi phonology and grammar based on data from Nepal, it is spoken in the Morang and Jhapa area of Nepal, where these are different, and it said that one is close to the Maithili speaking area. So, if you consider the geographical position of Nepal, it is to the north of Bihar and also West Bengal. So, in Bihar area, Maithili is spoken widely, and one variety of Rajbongshi is basically influenced by Maithili. So, here is some data from classroom that we have collected from classroom, and you can see some more variation. I have shown you some variation data from the same language previously, if you remember, when we discussed language variation, but now we are talking about two different areas. Earlier I have shown the data which one single child can access, the variants that one single child can access, but this is completely different, where in two different geographical locations children use this. They do not use them interchangeably, these are exclusive. So, you can find the first sentence, which is collected from Kuch Bihar area in West Bengal, Mui Kali Bhat Khaishung. Now, you know IPS, so you can read them, and you are familiar with Leipzig gloss as well. So, you can figure out the gloss as well. And Mui Kali Bhat Khaichu, which is collected from another district of West Bengal, Jalpaiguri, and I have also mentioned the name of the villages. We accessed the schools of these villages to collect data from children. So, these are two different forms, and please keep in mind that these are not accessible by a single child. These are two different points of a Rajbongshi continuum. So, when we consider variability again, we can say that the previous data had shown three different variants in the area where children can access all the variants, and here I am saying that it will change in other areas of the continuum. So, when we talk about continuum, we have to keep in mind that the variants are not same, neither the frequency nor the nature it is same. So, we have to consider on a particular point and figure out several sociolinguistic factors to consider the structure of variability. So, the old data and the new data are different regarding the continuum. I hope you understood that. At this point, let me talk about a hypothesis which was given by Basil Bernstein, who is a sociologist in the year 1975, who talked about the children who speak non-standard varieties and their situation in classrooms. So, this famous work called Class Code and Control, it talks about different set of codes used by the children in classroom. So, it said that children who speak the non-standard varieties do not have the access to the codes of standard varieties at times, and it is considered that the non-standard speaking children use a set of codes which is termed as restricted code, and there is something called elaborated code which is elaborate code which is actually provided by the standard. So, the difference between restricted code and elaborated code can be incorporated when we talk about language varieties. But there is a problem at this point. You can say when children who have access to multiple codes may not have access to the elaborated code. So, when we are trying to talk about the continuum and variants in different points of the continuum, it's mostly found that in rural areas children do not have access to elaborate codes, but they do have access to multiple restricted codes, which is an important finding for us. So, there are a few sociolinguistic issues which we can mention while relating sociolinguistics and language teaching. So, the first one is the idea of language shift, which you already know, and you also know the difference between language shift with language maintenance. So, we can say that language shift is a part of the classroom when children from non-standard speaking areas access formal languages. So, the formal languages will compel them to shift to the formal language and reject the restricted codes that we have already learned. And there are language based discriminations in classroom, which is known as linguicism, a term given by Stoves, Kutnap, Kangas. So, if you are familiar with the term linguicism, I am talking about the advanced learners, then you must be knowing that this is something which is language based discrimination. So, when we talk about racism, for example, which is a race based discrimination, it is similar. It said that language based discrimination is actually clubbed with other kind of discriminations like class, caste, gender based discrimination. We do not find them in isolation. So, there are several policy recommendations in India who talk about the use of children's familiar language in classroom. So, at this point you can ask, what is this familiar language? This is little fuzzy, the idea is fuzzy. So, we are talking about any language which is taken from the children's immediate environment. So, if you consider a multilingual child, there can be several languages which are there in the immediate environment of the child. So, I have mentioned some policies. I will quickly mention the names. It is not mandatory for you to know, but some of you already know about them. So, National Curriculum Framework by the NCERT 2005, National Education Policy to 2020, and Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan West Bengal 2016. So, all these policies have mentioned that the use of familiar language, at times the term mother tongue is also used, which you know by now is a problematic term. So, the familiar languages are supposed to be used in the classroom, which is not the case always because of linguicism and the language shift. So, we do find a gap between the policy recommendations and actual situation. So, at this point I will also tell you about the work that we are doing at IIT Kharagpur. So, which is basically bridging the gap between sociolinguistics and language teaching. So, we have chosen two different areas. So, I am mentioning one area here where we are exploring many languages or varieties. So, we are following a continuum, and the continuum goes through these three districts of West Bengal: Jhargram, Bankura and Purulia. These districts have borders with both Jharkhand and Odisha. So, we talk about we keep in mind the geographical barriers which can create certain isolated pockets where we will find very different kind of multilingualism in the pockets, like rivers and forests can create isolated patches or pockets. So, what we are doing is we are talking to school children from several schools and trying to understand their choices. So, when I am using the term choices, I am of course talking about the variants, and the choice can have multiple variants that I have already told you. Apart from talking to the children, we are also talking to the teachers and trying to understand their choices, and if the teachers are trying to talk about the formal language only in the classroom, it can be a problem. And another indicator for language shift, you know. So, we are trying to see if the hybrid language is used by the children and the teachers. The children have access to the hybrids, some teachers have access to the hybrids. So, we are trying to understand this and we are focusing the structure of verbs. So, when I am saying verbs, it is mostly morphosyntactic phenomena, you can also say partially semantic phenomena. So, we are trying to understand the structure of verbs in terms of agreement and understand the geographical spread of different hybrid languages. So, through the variants, through the mapping of variants from the data that we collect from school children, we are trying to see the geographical spread of hybrid languages, and we are trying to create some teaching learning materials in the linguistic varieties preferred by the children. So, if you ask me at this point, how will you create the linguistic materials? These are how will you create these teaching learning materials? This is actually a very complex work. It is indeed, because we have to consider a number of factors. We have to consider the nature of continuum, the point of continuum, and the other socio-historical phenomena, the socio-linguistic features associated with the classroom, as I have mentioned a few, and finally, the structure of the variants that we are finding from the classrooms. So, this work, as I told you, is a bridge between socio-linguistics and language teaching, and we are doing some morphosyntactic analysis too. So, here is a very sketchy map of the field area. This is not the entire area, but I have shown only one part where we are collecting data, and the color coded terms, color coded areas can represent the nature of multilingualism in this area. You can see that this area has multiple languages present, and as a result as lingua francas are different and the hybrids are different as well. So, let us talk about the hybrids, a few more things about the hybrids. So, we can say that the hybrid languages have different structures depending on the adjacent communities and social dynamics. So, adjacent communities, if you have a number of Austroasiatic speakers adjacent to a particular point, because there are a number of Austroasiatic languages spoken in these three districts. So, we can find that there are influences which are of course language contact related influences, and the social dynamics between the community member. If you consider the hierarchy, which can be a language hierarchy, which can be a social hierarchy, and language hierarchy can be seen as a part of the bigger social hierarchy. So, the hierarchy is also contributing to the nature of the hybrids. For example, if one target language is a dominant language, the hybrid will be basically taking features from the dominant language. And as I have already told you that this process of hybridization is not a random or sudden one, rather it is a gradual change. For years this change will take place, for years these communities will stay with each other. Maybe there was one migration that took place once upon a time, but now the communities are staying together for years, and as a result the mixed forms are being born. And when we talk about the hybrid languages, we talk about several factors like learning. So, you know that certain languages are learnt, you know, by this time. We also consider mixing factors, transfer of features from one language to another, and also leveling. What is leveling? So, if you have different languages, you basically bring down the features to one level. So, you use a very compromised kind of variety. So, when we talk about leveling, we do indicate the compromise that takes place when inter-community conversation takes place. And remember the idea of accommodation that we have already discussed. Accommodation has a major role to play at this point, because you know accommodation is basically restricting or initiating language shift, which in result is affecting in the structure of the variants. So, if we consider the spatial dynamics, because I told you that spatial dynamics is very important, because whenever we are talking about language continuum, we are indicating certain kind of geographical spread, right. So, we can say that the hybrids can exist where several languages are spoken by different communities. Speakers of the mixed languages can actually stop using the hybrid forms if the dominant languages influence. So, there are certain dominant languages, and by now you know what is standardization. So, there are certain standards like Bangla, Hindi, Odia and Santali in the area. So, which will definitely put a pressure on several hybrids, and as a result there can be the speakers who are no longer using the hybrid languages. And we can also find that the forms can be used in few areas of resistance. So, if you remember the class where we talked about language and identity, so maybe this is the hybrid form is used as an identity marker. This is a hypothetical situation, and as a result there is a resistance which is compelling them to use their hybrid forms. And a new round of mixing process can be observed if there is a migration of a new round of migration of a different community, or a community is moving somewhere else. So, there can be a new round of mixing, or you can say that influence of internet is actually helping in the mix to insert some English elements in the mixing, and it can be diffused in a large geographical area. So, a large geographical area can be a part of the continuum. We can also say that the languages can be spoken in the migratory hubs. So, now the question is, can we use the hybrids in the classroom? So, as Agnihotri said, multilinguality is embedded in the language itself. So, we cannot say that a language is monolingual, we already talked about it. So, we can use the hybrids which is suggested by us for various purposes. So, it is understood by the children of different communities because it is the lingua franca. Here are some more examples of hybrids from Indian context. So, North Bengal Sadri, Jharkhand Sadri or Nagpuri, Assam Sadri, these are used by children of multiple communities. So, if you actually recommend the use of hybrid from administrative point of view, it is doable. And it is not only helping the children to get a familiar language in the classroom, which the policies are recommending, and it is resisting shift to major languages. So, the proposal of using hybrids in classroom are actually talking about various factors like language maintenance, resistance of language shift, and using the language of the children's immediate environment, and also accessibility by children from multiple communities. Now, the question is, how can we use them? We can say that teacher student interactions can be done in hybrid. Actually, it takes place. We have received a number of responses from teachers where they do conduct the informal discussion mostly outside the classroom with the children in the local hybrids. And there are some punishment factors in classroom for speaking so called bad or inferior languages. If we allow the teachers to use this, the punishment can be restricted. So, it is recommended through different programs that children can narrate stories or describe something. If you remember the class where we talked about language skills, we talked about different tasks for classroom. So, we are coming back to tasks, keeping in mind the socio-linguistic factors. So, these can be done in the hybrids. Certain word lists can be prepared, short text can be prepared, and at times teachers can record them with their mobile phones and play them again and again for listening exercise. So, these are suggested to be used for the teacher training components as well, so that the teachers can know how to use them instead of just knowing through some policy recommendations only. Trainings will be helpful. So, we are coming to the conclusion part of the class. We have learnt about the fact that a classroom has different dynamics, and when I am saying dynamics, of course, I am talking about multiple factors. So, we can say that we can locate socio-linguistic variation in a classroom, and there are certain codes that we have learned today according to the deficit hypothesis, like elaborated codes and restricted codes, and the hybrids can be used in classroom. There are a couple of suggestions from the ongoing work of IIT KGP that I have mentioned. So, we also talked about the fact that hybrids can be used in certain ways. So, here are some key references, and thank you.